Hey, just wanted to throw it in there in the post-production of this episode, but on Friday the 31st, I will be streaming chapters 1 and 2 of Deltarune, and I won't just be streaming it by myself, I will be joined by Pastra, so if you enjoy their content, or mine, I hope you enjoy my content, be sure to tune in on Friday, March 31st. Anyway, thanks for being a subscriber, and if you aren't, well, you should. This is gonna be a special one. Alright, so as I'm sure the majority of you watching know by now, my channel first started gaining real steam about a month back when I first covered Spectre Animation's FNaF VHS series. This was a very fun watch and a fun video to make. It prompted replies from other creators, including Spectre himself and even Baddington, who I would end up covering next. But despite all of the videos I made, Spectre is still the one I have to be the most grateful for. I literally would not be where I am right now had I not reviewed his series, so please return the love and subscribe to his channel. Spectre recently went through a hacked channel situation very similar to Baddington, so they could use any extra support I could possibly send their way right now. Regardless, I think I should cut to the chase about why I'm making this video. Just before the hack, Spectre had released a brand new episode to their series, the longest one yet at 30 minutes, called Police Archive. With that badass withered Voxy in the thumbnail, I knew I had to watch. However, for whatever reason, I ended up not watching it the day it released. So I was locked out of the viewing experience until Spectre got his channel back. Theoretically, if I wanted, I could scrub for a re-upload of some kind, but I felt it was only the right thing to wait until this situation was resolved. And now that it has, I can finally sit down and watch. So let's do it. The episode begins in total darkness, a black screen, as we're introduced to Agents Edwards and Wallace of the FBI. The description of the video shows that this is about the Northview Mall incident, implying that these detectives are here to investigate whatever this incident was. It's worth noting that so far, each of these videos has taken place in the time period between the missing children's incident and FNaF 2, so we're dealing with the withered and sometimes unwithered animatronics. And more importantly to me, they're spirits. One of the big praises I had of the last episode was in how Spectre was able to revive, no pun intended, the ghost part of this ghost story. Moving on, we're also introduced to Police Sergeant Miller. It seems that the agents are trying to catch up on a murder case, as well as theft and bribery, according to the officers reporting to the agents. We see a corkboard appear that's littered with papers and photos. This is definitely a police headquarters of some kind. We're told that this murder relates back to a series of disappearances related to Fazbear Entertainment about a year beforehand. It's worth noting that in most of the previous videos, the phrase next year is often thrown around to imply FNaF 2's location hasn't opened yet, which means this tape takes place in 1987. Agent Edwards then recaps the disappearance of Sean Roberts, aka the paranormal investigator we saw in the last episode. He apparently was hired to investigate the place only to then go missing, with his family reporting he hadn't come home the following morning. We even see a missing persons report on the screen, and although this is cool, it's not really important at this moment in time. It's mostly just showing us what was included in the police archive. But we do get some more relevant information after the fact. Namely, people had heard the gunshot from Sean being killed that night, and police were pretty much immediately called. When they got there, they found the broken glass, a small blood sample, and fingerprints on all of Sean's equipment, confirming it was him. We then get a surprisingly smart answer to a question that had been nagging at me since the last episode. That being how William Afton, Sean's killer, could be so casual and not worry about being caught on camera. Edwards reminds us that Sean asked for all the power in the building to be cut off for his investigation, meaning no cameras. With no leads, the police apparently just brushed the case off as a robbery gone wrong, which couldn't exactly be proven wrong given they didn't have a body or any witnesses. But that wasn't the only death. We're then told that a couple months later, a mechanic working for Afton Robotics, Fazbear Entertainment's sister company, had also gone missing. This one's name was Matthew Waters, and he's the mechanic who we saw in another episode, Withering Bonnie. And once again, just before Matthew's death, power in the building gets cut off, so no cameras could capture his death. This is the case that tipped the police off to keep a closer eye on Fazbear Entertainment. As they put it, we all know lightning doesn't strike in the same place twice. The third disappearance, and the one that really set the FBI off, was the disappearance of a new hire named Jacob Carter, who apparently went missing on his first day. This, of course, is the employee from the salvage video, the one who was working on Chica. And here's the thing, when the police ask for camera footage, This time Fazbear Entertainment agreed, but when they went to retrieve it, they found it had gone missing. The agents converse about how fishy it is and how there's a pattern here between disappearances and lack of cooperation. But that's all just in addition to the disappearances of 4 missing children. I'll admit, making it 4 instead of 5 is a bit strange to me, because it's always been known to be about 5 kids, but I suppose this series will probably have its own different explanation for Golden Freddy. The detectives state that each of the families of these kids sued Fazbear Entertainment, which cost them millions, pushing them closer to bankruptcy every time. But then we hear something unusual. Apparently, someone confessed to everything, to being the one responsible for all the deaths, the camera footage going missing, everything. This person confessed to killing Gabriel Martins, Jeremy and Susie Collins, and Fritz Robinson, as well as the 3 adults from the tapes. This is something we know can't be true considering we know at least 2 of these people died to animatronics, but I guess they could technically be responsible. What is murder with an animatronic considered? 2nd degree? 3rd? 4th? This guy also said that he killed them because they were too close to discovering the truth, but he apparently shut up after that. He couldn't say what the truth was, where the bodies were, or how long he's been killing people. This has actually led to some doubt. The chief of police says that this whole scenario regarding the confessor seems too good to be true. There's something greater at play here. There's a bit of an argument between everyone regarding what to do going forward. Here we have someone who is willingly trying to take the blame for all these crimes, but truthfully doesn't seem to know anything about them. The FBI wants to know if there's anything else that can be shown, and apparently there is. An officer had recorded the whole ordeal the previous night, but parts of it are apparently too much to be shown to the general public yet. And that brings us to the blue stop and start recording screen from the beginning of all of the other tapes. It seems that this whole meeting was meant to simply reintroduce us to the series and also clue us in on how the tape will end. I have to admit, this intro, although a bit long, over 5 minutes of exposition dumping, is still really cool and recontextualizes everything we've seen up to this point. It makes it out to be a much larger conspiracy, and I honestly love it. The camera starts in a police cruiser with officers Daryl and Clyde, driving through the woods in an obligatory driving through the woods segment that literally every single analog horror series does now. Apparently, the officers are out looking for someone and come across a truck driving slowly in front of them. Daryl calls it in and finds that the vehicle was reported stolen from a rental service and was seen to have a brand logo on the side. They pull the truck over and Daryl steps out. He takes the keys the driver had and talks to him about how he obtained this vehicle. The driver provides license and registration, and Clyde runs it through the dispatch radio. He then reveals the name on the license, Oscar Master. But dispatch can't seem to find anything on this guy. Although the physical description is the same as someone another unit saw earlier, this ID is most likely fake. Clyde tells Daryl that the ID is fake, and the 2 officers leave the car. Clyde to make sure Oscar's friend doesn't get away, and Daryl to cuff Oscar. But when Daryl goes to the driver's side door again, Oscar's supposed friend isn't there. Something causes Daryl to retreat backwards and start firing at the door, but he's knocked to the ground swiftly, immediately, and most likely fatally. Clyde calls in for backup, and the back of the truck opens. A man in a mask and jumpsuit is there, with his hands up, standing in front of the withered animatronics. Clyde demands he get up and get out of the truck, but the man doesn't move. While this happens, withered Foxy stands up behind the man, who steps out of the way. Foxy growls angrily and crouches down, staring at Clyde, jumping on him and bringing him to the ground. The man in the truck then jumps down out of the truck and runs off screen, leaving the truck void, save for a withered Chica and withered Bonnie. We see another man walk over to Daryl's body, holding a black bag. The 2 men shout to each other, "What now? Just stick to the plan, come on." The man with the bag then runs into the woods. Withered Foxy stands back up after having killed Clyde. He turns to the woods and runs off as well, as though he's one of the crime boys. But then, Clyde is alright. He stands up again, coughing, a bit injured, but alive. He tries to radio dispatch once more, but they're not coming through to him now. He drops his radio and looks ready to become our new main protagonist for the rest of the video. Clyde runs over to Daryl's body and unfortunately confirms what we already knew. He's gone. He tries Daryl's radio, but it's not working either. Clyde gets back into the car and tries to come up with a plan, only to realize he has no idea where those guys in the masks went. Clyde picks up the camera and decides to go look for them, and this is when the format becomes much more familiar. Something about how Spectre is able to do shaky cam in such a convincing way, even though no one is actually holding this entirely virtual camera. Oh, I love it. I could go into it further at some point, but one thing that makes good analog horror is knowledge about actual blocking and character movement. It's not enough to have some cool scenery, you need to make it feel real, and one way to do that is by having good, precise blocking and movement. Sure, some series skirt this and get by, but it's the truly good ones that utilize the camera like an actual camera. Anyway, Clyde starts his march through the woods, claiming to not care what it was that attacked him. They won't be getting away with it. Driven by more revenge than Frank Castle, Clyde finally stumbles upon a mall, and comes to a door with smashed glass. Oddly enough, the glass is actually broken in a way that it could have only been broken from the inside. I know for a fact this isn't a mistake because this similar detail was mentioned by the agents earlier when recounting Sean's death. Clyde squeezes through the door and shines his light around. It's a damn big space with plenty of room for the suspects from earlier to hide. As Clyde explores the building, he comments on how it was likely built in the 60s or 70s, but his attention is brought over to a light source, meaning there's still power in the building. He then spots a map and decides what he needs to do is find a phone, so he needs an office. Clyde finds one on the map on the east side of the second floor, and begins climbing an escalator to get there. However, the sounds of metal moving above him stop him in his tracks, followed by voices. One is an American accent and one is an English accent. Clyde continues in silence. It seems the suspects from earlier have business here and are worried about being found by police. Clyde concludes that the two men are scrappers, people who steal old tech or parts of tech for money. As one is reaching in an overhead light, Clyde scoots closer into the darkness. After one of them claims he found what they were looking for, he says to the other to open the bag. However, Clyde tries to get closer and steps on some broken glass, which alerts the suspects. Clyde comes out of hiding and tries to arrest the two holding his gun up, but the scrappers start firing at him with a machine gun. Clyde drops the camera and we see a new angle of him from the side as he goes about firing. The scrappers run away and Clyde picks the camera back up to resume our little first-person adventure. As he progresses further, we can hear some familiar metallic whirring. He gives chase to the scrappers, but is stopped when he sees withered Foxy staring at him. He turns and starts running, turning to fire back at Foxy now and then, only finally safe when he manages to slam a door on Foxy's face. One interesting detail about this particular chase scene is Foxy's noises during it seem to be a mix of the normal growling we usually hear in these tapes and more of a twisted, piratey cackle, which is perfect for his character. Clyde aims his gun at the door and waits, Foxy hitting it like he would in FNaF 1. Eventually, though, the growling and banging subsides, only for the door to suddenly be burst open and Foxy to run at Clyde in the dark. Clyde runs once more through the narrow, confusing halls of this backrooms-esque area of the mall, and he finds this wide room with what looks to be conveyor belts. He turns off his light and crawls under one of the belts to hide, with the sound of Foxy stomping his way into the room. In fact, we can see Foxy's eyes, and as they draw nearer, the footsteps grow louder and more close together. Suddenly, his face is inches from the camera, staring at it. But for whatever reason, it's as though he doesn't see Clyde. He stands back up, and he stomps away. Clyde claims he hates that thing, and we cut to him exploring a different hall of the mall, with several windows smashed apart. He eventually finds an office, but it's locked, so he smashes the glass. After letting himself in, he sets the camera on the desk and picks up the phone, happy to see it still works. He calls and explains the situation, but for some reason the 911 operator doesn't seem to believe him, and thinks it's a prank. However, before he can keep arguing with the lady, the scrappers from earlier approach, having heard his voice. He brings the camera, light, and phone under the desk, and tells them to bring him some backup. We hear one of the scrappers stop in his tracks and yell for the other. Chris is the British one, and the other scrapper yells that Clyde was still alive and got to one of the phones. Chris asks where the robot is, and the other says he doesn't know. They have to call it back. We hear a loud humming sound and what sounds like footsteps as the scrappers talk about continuing their work before the cops get there. Clyde peeks his head and the camera out the door after the scrappers leave, but hides again when Foxy comes storming around the corner. Suddenly, the scrappers turn their lights back down the hall to show Foxy had marched right past Clyde, but now everyone knew where he was. Clyde starts to run but is caught by machine pistol fire in the leg. As Foxy begins his chase once again, Clyde looks back at him. There's this really cool shot where as Clyde is trying to run, they circle around this opening in the floor, and he fires back at Foxy from the other side of it. In one last push, he turns around and fires at him, a combination of bullets and flashlight holding him off, until they're both down on the ground. But then Clyde swaps his gun for his taser, and shoots Foxy with it in the gaping hole exposing his endo chest. Foxy freaks out and collapses. Clyde gets up, alleviated that this plan actually worked, and the sounds of police sirens and a chopper fill the air, as well as a bright light. Clyde hobbles down the escalator into the door, where police encounter him. He puts his hands up in the air and calls out, "Blue, blue, don't shoot." Police flood the building after Clyde confirms his identity, and he explains the busted radio situation. He also explains that Daryl is probably dead, and that even though his head was bashed in pretty good and he's been shot in the thigh, he'll try to help fight as much as possible. After recounting the rest of the situation, the cops move out to capture the scrappers. They corner one in a hallway, but instead of surrendering, the suspect fires his gun at them and tries to escape. In the ensuing shootout, the scrapper is brought down, neutralized. When they ask where the other is, the scrapper shouts for help. They eventually find him locked in an office room similar to the one Clyde was in earlier. The police break the door down to get at him, and he pretty willingly gives himself up. When they ask him what his name is, he tells them, Henry. Henry Emily. End of the tape. And what an ending that was. So we have a lot to talk about, don't we? But the first thing I feel I need to talk about is that ending, where it's revealed the surviving scrapper was Henry Emily, aka William Afton's business partner. It's not clear what he was doing, or why, but I have my own theories that I'll get to. But it does make me wonder about Chris. Who exactly is Chris? Between the two, going back through the episode, it seems like Chris was the one primarily doing the work, while Henry was kinda monitoring things. It also seems that Henry was the one who brought Foxy along, as Chris at one point refers to it as your robot when talking to Henry. But honestly, I'll be blunt, I kind of expected this reveal from the beginning. As it was stated, Henry gave himself up willingly and confessed to all the crimes we've seen in the previous videos. Based on Henry's previous characterization, it makes sense that he feels guilty for his role in all of Afton's murders. This is why he claims to be the one to have done them, but can't provide any information as to how, or when, or why. He knows that he's at least partly responsible, and thus he wants to be punished for it. However, since he's not really the one who did it, he's incapable of being any actual help to the case. But what exactly is happening in this episode? Well, I have to admit, I'm at a bit of a loss. This episode is both the most story and action heavy in the series, which is fine, but it does leave me scratching my head. By this point in the story, it seems like the withered animatronics have, well, withered, but they haven't yet been put to use in the FNaF 2 location, especially since this episode would have happened sometime around August of 1987, and FNaF 2 takes place in November of 1987. How do I know this episode takes place in August? Well, we're told that Sean Roberts disappeared about a year ago, in August of 1986, which places this episode about a year later. So while it could take place in July or October or hell, September, I'm pretty confident that this is still happening before FNaF 2, which means we're definitely in some murky waters when it comes to storytelling. Since Henry's been arrested for Afton's crimes, it seems like maybe William will be the one to open the FNaF 2 location. It's a possibility, but personally, I always considered the FNaF 2 location to be Henry's doing. It's a bit hard to deconstruct this series' timeline when I have my own rough idea of events that it doesn't perfectly line up with. But the biggest thing to me is going to be how Withered Foxy was effectively zapped into being police evidence, but in a couple months' time he should be good enough to wander around a new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. My personal theory thus far is that Henry and William were worried about going bankrupt, so they decided that in order to get new parts for the animatronics they would be building, they needed to steal from the old mall. William would have been the one to hire Chris. He may even be a relative of William's given they're both English. But Henry was the one in charge of the actual operation. That said, Chris was taking things too far. Although Henry brought a regular handgun, Chris brought a machine pistol. After killing Daryl, Chris took the lead and brought Henry and one of the activated robots to the mall. I don't know if Henry knew the animatronic was possessed or not, but he was using it as a sort of bodyguard to deter people from checking up on them. But the fact that Foxy is a lot more aggressive than anticipated leads to Henry being confused about where Foxy went after chasing Clyde. In the end, with the entire operation having fallen apart and Chris winding up dead, Henry gave in to his guilt and confessed to everything, including crimes he never committed. That's my theory anyway. As for the actual quality of the episode itself, I have to admit, I still prefer Paranormal Investigation. This is still one of the better episodes, and is the most impressive when it comes to animation, but I gotta give it to the more slow burn horror of that episode as to the more quick panic sequences when Foxy gives chase in this one. These chases are still scary, but they aren't as effective as Freddy's was in my opinion. I heavily enjoyed this episode in ways that are very different from Paranormal Investigation, but I do prefer horror to action. That said, this is some of the best indirect storytelling I've seen in an analog horror series. It does require you to know the FNaF lore yourself a bit, but honestly that's totally legitimate. It doesn't take away from your enjoyment, and we'll probably eventually find out more anyway. But that's it for this time. I'd say this video is a solid 8.5 out of 10. I love it, and I cannot wait to see this story continue. Do I hope it brings back horror as its main theme? Yes, but with the story it's told so far regarding this conspiracy involving Henry, I wouldn't be disappointed at all if that's where Spectre's motivations are. Until next time, I'm DMuted. Be sure to like and subscribe, it's completely free, and you can opt out whenever you like. Peace.